What's going on there, YouTube? It's a very special episode today. I've had a long ongoing relationship with Shapeways, and we've done some stuff with the Sand Scorcher and things like that. And the trend these days seemed to be more about developing items for 3D printing. And so I worked with Shapeways, and they put me in touch with Autodesk and Fusion360. And I'm completely new to this. I have no idea how to use the software. So they got me a tutorial with a Autodesk representative named Taylor Stein. He's a technology evangelist with Autodesk and Fusion360. So I thought I would share all this with you because it's a great intro to the software. After spending about an hour screen sharing with him, with Taylor, I got a little bit better understanding of how it works. I'm still no master at all. But for this idea, I wanted to make a hood emblem, a hood ornament for like off of old Mercury or something to use on my rat rods. So Taylor walks us through the steps on how to use the software and how we come up with this. And he did all the design. I'm not going to try to lie to you. I did a little bit of tweaking to it later, but you'll see that in the video. And yeah, so if you're interested in learning Fusion360, follow along, and then we'll go through the process at the end with prototyping with Shapeways, adjusting dimensions and stuff through Shapeways, and we'll get all these awesome prints here at the bottom, including some metal prints. So here we go.
So a little bit of a walkthrough around the tool. So this is Fusion. We have, when you open it up for the first time, you'll just have this blank sort of window here. And to walk you through sort of the fundamentals, so you have in your Fusion application up here in the upper left is the current workspace that you're in. Mm-hmm. And this is really just getting down to what is it that you're trying to do in the software. So if you're looking to create solid 3D models, that would be here in the model workspace. If you're looking to make sheet metal parts, that would be here. If you're looking to take your design and simulate it or make nice renderings of it, there's sort of individual workspaces, and each workspace will have its own set of tools. So if I switch over to the render workspace, I have tools just for rendering out the model. So you'll do the majority of your work in the model workspace. That's just creating solid 3D models. And then the process that's really common is that you first sketch your shape. So you're making mainly 2D sketches here, and these are all the tools you have to draw those two-dimensional shapes. And then you're using these 3D sort of functions like extrude or evolve to create 3D objects out of those two-dimensional shapes.
Okay.
The project that you sent over, the hood ornament's a little bit different because it's such a sort of free-form looking shape. You can't really capture it by just drawing out a two-dimensional version of it and then making it thicker. It wouldn't quite look right.
Yeah.
So we're going to go about doing that a little bit of a different way. But these are all the tools up here. And then if I go to the finished one over here, this on the left is your browser, which is really just a list of items in your Fusion360 design. So if you're used to like Illustrator or Photoshop, this would be just sort of your layers over here. And they're organized into folders. So here's my bodies folder, which has different solid bodies that I've made. I can make them visible or hide them with a little light bulb. And down here at the bottom is your timeline, which is really just the history of all of the features that you use. So if I made this with 20 features, I'd have a list of all 20 features down here at the bottom. And the nice part is I can always roll back in time and make a change and roll forward.
Okay.
In this case,
Photoshop, very similar.
Yeah, in this case, it's pretty short because I made this using our freeform tools, which unfortunately doesn't capture history every step of the way because you're sort of pushing and pulling on things, and it's pretty almost impossible to capture all of those little movements that you do.
Okay.
But that's just a good thing to note. And then on the left over here is your data panel. So all of your files They're stored online as well as locally. In case you use Fusion somewhere without an internet connection, your last, by default, I believe 2 weeks worth of work is cached locally. So how this was made is using the freeform tools inside of Fusion. Obviously, it's not finished, but it's getting there. And these work a little bit different than the other tools, but let me go ahead and move to a blank design so I can show you how they work. So to create any of these freeform shapes, if you go to the Create menu, you have this purple Create Form button. That's also up here. And this takes you into what we call the Sculpt workspace, which lets you move around different quads or little squares, almost like it's clay. You can push and pull, you can stretch things, you can work with it almost like you're working with it with your hands. So it's a whole different way of operating than drawing two-dimensional shapes. So for something like this, I can just go to the Create menu and we can start with any of these primitive shapes. So we could start with a box or a pipe, whatever it is. In this case, just to show you how it works, I'm going to choose a box. And the nice part about using these tools is that it's really independent from the rest of Fusion, and that it doesn't take hours and hours and hours to understand the process. I think it's pretty straightforward. So I told the software I wanted a box, and one tip that I have is if you ever are not sure what the software wants you to do, you can just stop moving your mouse and it'll tell you what it wants.
Okay.
If like you're in the middle of a command. So here it says select a plane or planar face. And this is because I created a box and it wants to know, does the box sit on the ground or does it sit on one of these vertical walls? Doesn't really matter when you have an empty design, but ideally you want to keep things symmetric about the origin right here. That's this point. So I can say it sits on the ground. Again, if I don't know what it wants, I can stop moving the mouse and it says specify a center point. So I can click at the center and then move my mouse out to create a rectangle out here. And then this is really where I can set up my shape that I start out with. So if I wanted to have it be a certain size, I could use these arrows to set its size. I'll show you afterwards how we can bring in a picture for reference, which is really handy.
Yeah.
So I can create this and I can change the number of faces that we have going in any direction. So you want to have as few faces as possible, but if I'm trying to create, this hood ornament, I'm not going to be able to make it with just 2 faces. I don't really have enough patches to move around. So you can always change that number by dragging these sliders over here. So you can see that this allows me to have more or less faces in any of these directions. And the nice part about that is you can have detail where you want it, but maybe I don't have a whole lot of detail in the sort of thickness of the part, so I don't want to have 6 faces going that way as well, because that would just make it really clunky to work with. So we can leave that at a low number like 2 or 3.
Okay.
And let me just go ahead and create it so I can show you how it works. And then once you have this shape, you can push and pull using this Edit Form tool. It's the first tool here under Modify. All these other ones are more advanced. Edit Form does 90% of the work. So if I choose this tool, I can pick anything I want. So I could pick this little patch right here. And then all of these little buttons are things that I can do to whatever I have selected. So if I selected this patch, I can grab this arrow, and that will move it up and down vertically. You can see it all stays connected, which is nice. Or I can move it side to side, or I can move it forward and back that way. And then you can also use these other tools like rotate to twist it around, or these other ones here, which will scale it in a single direction or scale it along a plane. Pretty straightforward tools, but it allows you to grab any of these. So you can grab a point if I want and just move this point around, or I can hold shift and I can grab a set of these and I can move those around if I want as well. And then the other part is let's say I wanted to have some like winged shapes come out of here. If I try to just use this arrow, see how it sort of just stretches everything? It just kind of pulls everything with it. What I can do is instead of just dragging on it, if I hold down the Alt or Option key, and then I drag, it'll actually add additional faces. So you can see before it was just stretching everything, whereas here I can hold the Alt key and drag out, and now I just have one little arm sticking out, and I can do it again, and now I have another piece. And I can sort of do this to create more geometry than what I originally started with. And if I wanted to, I could move this guy around if I wanted to. And then the nice part is when I'm all done, I can hit finish form, and this is just a solid object that I can do anything to. So if I wanted to, let me just go back. If I wanted to 3D print this, it's ready for 3D printing. If, let's say, I needed this to have holes that were a certain size for a screw, I could do more of the traditional 3D modeling where I could sketch out holes of a certain size and cut them out of this shape, where I can be really precise and specific, whereas when I'm sculpting, you're really eyeballing it. You can't create like exactly a 3 millimeter hole, but once you hit that finish form button and now you're back in the model workspace, you can add those more specific features if I wanted to. If I wanted to put a hole in this, I could create a sketch on one of these planes. I could sketch on this plane. And I can grab under my sketch menu and draw any of these shapes. So if I wanted to draw a circle, I could choose my center diameter circle tool. And I could draw a circle of a certain size. So if whatever this shape is, I needed a 15 millimeter circle, I could draw that. And then I can click this stop sketch button to sort of put my pencil down. And then I can use this extrude tool to take that shape and sort of cut it out. I can just drag it up and create a cut. And there's some tutorials I can share with you on the basics of doing that more traditional 3D modeling where you're sketching things out and then doing things to those sketches to either add geometry or remove geometry, but I wanted to show you mainly the sculpting workflow today. So one thing that is really nice is that if we have reference images, we can drop them in and then use those as a starting point. So in order to do that, what you need to do is click on the Insert menu and then choose Attached Canvas. And this will allow you to drop in a picture and then we can size it accordingly. So I'll choose Attached Canvas. First, it wants me to select a face. So really we're working in 3D, so it wants to know where is this image living? Does it live on the floor or on one of these vertical walls? So I can, it doesn't really matter, but I could choose the ground. That way we're sort of putting this picture flat on the ground. And then I can go ahead and grab the image. So I have somewhere over here, this picture, which I think was in an email that you shared.
Yeah.
And I can scale it up. I'm not really worrying about the size. I'm just scaling it up so that I can see it. And this little view cube up here is always here, and it's a nice way to move around the 3D space. So if I click on top, for example, I'll now look at this directly top down. And I'll see the red and green lines that represent the major axes here. And I want to sort of tilt this picture so that everything lines up. It would be a little bit tricky if this is sort of off at an angle and I'm trying to work in a 3D environment that's really off from that. It can make things difficult down the road. So what I'm going to do is just rotate this around just to tilt the picture a little bit until it looks to be at the proper angle. So I can come here and see that that looks pretty lined up, and I can move the image around with this one here. So that looks good to me. And then in this dialog window, I just want to make sure that display through is checked. And what that does is if I have a 3D model on top of this, it'll still show the picture and it won't hide the picture beneath it. So I just want to make sure that's checked. And then I'll hit OK. So we've got our picture now dropped into our 3D environment. If I drag this cube around, we can see, let me turn on the grid. You can see here that we sort of have our ground plane and that picture lives flat. What we can also do is, let me turn off the grid, is if I open up my canvas folder, so here in the browser, this is a list of everything in our design. We have canvases and this picture that we just added. So if I right click on that, I can actually choose calibrate. And now I can pick 2 points on this picture and tell the software how far away those 2 points are. So if I want this to be a certain size, I can click on the back and click on the front and then type in a value, and it will scale that picture in our 3D environment so that I can directly model off of it and use it as reference. And you can see right now it's 170 millimeters because I wasn't really worrying about scale when I brought it in. So I could type in 20 millimeters. And now it's resized that picture for us. One thing I will say, as far as moving around the workspace, you can always click and drag on the view cube to move around. And if you get lost, you can hit the home button and it takes you back to a nice view. If you do have a mouse, it's really handy for moving around. So if you do have a mouse, you can scroll up or scroll down to zoom in or zoom out. And you can actually click the scroll wheel, and then you can move your mouse around to pan. So I can just pan up or pan down, similar to in Illustrator or Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I want to orbit in 3D, I can either drag on the view cube, or if I hold shift and then click on the scroll wheel again, I can orbit around. So this will let you move around the 3D space pretty easily. There we go. So what I want to do now is we have our canvas, so I can create a sculpted body like I was showing you earlier, and we can try to push and pull the shapes around until we get something like this.
Okay.
So to do that, I'll click create form, and we can start with a box. I'm just going to start by making a box that represents sort of the main almost fuselage here, and then we can try to pull some geometry out to give it the rest of the wings. So to do that, I'll click create and choose a box, and I can place it on this ground plane here, and I can position it somewhere like this, and you can see there's the 3D shape, and by default it only has 2 faces in every direction, so we don't have enough faces going down the length in order to pull out sort of this wing shape. So I need to give myself more there, so I can drag this arrow up to create more faces. Maybe we can start with 5, or we can go with 6. Let's try 6. The trick here is you want to have enough so that you can accomplish what you want, but if you have too many, so if I have 20, it's now completely overbearing and it's almost impossible to work with it. So it's a little bit of a balancing act there, and I'd say it takes a little bit of practice to get used to the number that you need. So I can also specify a height for all of this. I'm sort of eyeballing it, but if there was a certain height, we could set that here. So maybe we want to set it to 2 millimeters. I could type in 2. Doesn't really matter because we're all referencing this image here, so it's pretty well calibrated. And then the other important part is I want to turn symmetry on. So what that does is it will create a rule so that anything I do to one side will be reflected on the other, so we don't have to do double the work and manually make sure it looks the same on both sides. So to do that, I went ahead and turned symmetry on, and then we can add length, width, or height symmetry. So if I click length symmetry, we'll see this green line going down the middle, which tells me anything I do to one side of that line will happen on the other, and that's exactly what we want. I can turn width symmetry on, but that's not what we want. That would be creating sort of nose to tail symmetry, and then also height symmetry, but that also is not what we want. So we want to make sure it's set to length symmetry. And I'll hit OK, and now we have this sort of block of clay that we can start to sculpt to however we see fit. So again, we're going to use the edit form tool. So I'll go edit form, and it's really handy to work in just sort of these planar views where I'm just looking at it from one view. So I'm going to look at it from the top, and I can drag. If I wanted to, first I can see that the nose doesn't match up. So I can always drag a box around these faces to select multiple. So I can drag a box to select all of those, and I can just move this back until I reach the nose. I can also thin this out by scaling it down that way if I want. So you can see that it starts to scale it that way. And I might now grab this edge loop and scale that down, just so it sort of is this gradual transition. And we can do the same in the back over here. Takes a little bit of practice to get used to what it is you need to scale down and how, but it's pretty easy. It's not too tricky. There is some fine tuning, obviously, but just by looking at it at one view at a time, we can start to get a hang of it. So we can ignore, probably for now, how it looks from the side. We could probably tackle that after this. So I'm just going to look at it from the top, and let's say now we want to start creating these sort of winged shapes. So I want to make sure I have some faces that I can pull out this way, and I actually have an edge right here. I can drag a window around, select all of it, and I can start to bump it out to like right there. And I could grab this patch and pull it out, but I have this edge which sits in sort of a precarious situation. So I'm going to select that edge and move it up to somewhere in the middle. And then I want to make sure I give myself another edge right here. That way we have two faces we can pull out. Pretty much as long as we have edges where we need them, it'll make things a whole lot easier. So I could either grab this edge loop here and drag it up to this junction where we want the wings to come out. But that's going to give me two really long patches back here. So what I'm going to do is use a different tool. We have this tool called Insert Edge. And I can double click on this edge here to select the entire loop. And now I can place another edge loop wherever I want. So I'm just going to place it somewhere over here. That way now we have, if we look at it from the side, I have these sets of faces that I can sort of pull out. We're already sort of matching the shape that we want. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So I'll select both of those, and then I'll choose Edit Form again. And this is the situation I was telling you about, where if I were to just drag these out, it's just gonna flare it out. So I need to make sure I'm holding the Alt or Option key, and then I can drag out. So I'll drag out like this and let go, and then I'll click again, still holding Option, and I'll drag another time. So I'm just gonna get these out there, and then we can look up from the top and see what we need to move around. So I can select this edge, for example, and I can see that this needs to get moved around a little bit. I can grab this edge and move that in. Grab this edge and move that one in. And now we're pretty much just working with this as if it were clay. Let me go up to the top. And move these out if I want. And then what I might do is, if overall this is looking too thick from the side, I can drag a box over all of it, and I can just scale all of this down. That way we have just a thinner overall shape. And then the next part we can do is tackling sort of where it transitions over, and you could do this a few different ways. We could continue grabbing these faces out here and sort of pull them out, which might work. What I did was I created another box out on one side, and then I sort of started inching both of them towards each other so that we could get the right transition that I wanted. But it's really up to you, and it's a little bit of practice to get used to how that works. So I can show you how I did that. Is I just went to the Create button, and I said I want another box, and I'll make it on this plane. And I'm just going to create just a little box over here with, let's just say, 3 faces. And I don't need symmetry. Is that okay? And now I can, ended up being really small, so I can make it bigger. I can grab this whole loop and move that guy. So I can double click on it and move that up. Cool. So now I can grab all of this, make it a little bit thicker. So now if I have this shape that I know I want to end with, and we could modify it, so if I wanted it to line up better, I could select all of it and choose edit form, and I can move it up there, and I can move the back out a little bit. And now it's really just a matter of connecting everything. So one thing that is a little bit tricky when you're doing something like this is if you have these completely solid closed off pieces, you can't quite join them easily. So what I'm going to do is for both of them, I'm just going to open up the ends so I can select all of these and hit delete. And now we have this like open tube to work with. And then I can do the same over here and delete those. And now our job is to figure out how we sort of bend these and bring them together and then weld them all together. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. One thing I will do is, it's a little bit tricky. It might give me some errors because I'm going to bring this side over and weld it to this one. It might get a little bit worried because I don't have one on the other side. And what I will do is ultimately once I connect it, I will then just get rid of everything on one half of this and then mirror it over at the end. So it's not really a problem. So what I can do now is I can grab, let's just grab this entire edge loop, and I can rotate that around and try to bring these together. So I can grab these and move this around and get them closer. And then I can grab the entire loop. So one trick is if you double click on an edge, it'll select the entire loop, which saves a whole lot of time. So you don't have to manually go around and click everything. So I can just double click and that's the whole loop. And we can hold Alt again to create these other extrusions. So I'm just going to try to rotate this around. And slowly, we will be able to connect these. This is one of those things where the more time we spend on it, the better of a job we'll probably do. But at least for teaching you how it works, I think this should be good. So let me go ahead and grab this entire loop, and I'll hold Alt to add one more set of faces out here. And I can scale this down. One thing that you always want to be aware of is the number of, if you're doing something like this where you're connecting two separate pieces, is you want to be aware of the number of edges that you have. So ideally you have sort of this consistent flow of edges going all the way through. Where we can see that I have two edges on the top, two on the sides, and so 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. If this had 3 edges all the way around, it would be a little bit tricky and the geometry won't look as nice at the end. So whenever you can, you want to make sure you have these edges lining up. That'll create nice and smooth transitions between everything. So then to connect these under the Modify menu, there's this tool called Weld Vertices. And what that will do is I will pick one point on one body and a second point on the other body, and it will go ahead and snap them together. So if I wanted to start welding this together, I could pick this point over here, and then I can grab the top point over here, and it snaps it over. So it'll move whichever you pick first to whatever you pick second. So I can go ahead and start sort of stitching all this together. So let me grab these. Make sure I grab the right ones. And you can see, even from this example, how useful it is to not have unnecessary faces. Did I mess that up? No. So by keeping the faces to a minimum, it makes your job a whole lot easier at the end here when you're really only having to connect 6 of these things and connecting 20 of them. So that's how I started to model this. And we can always do things like we can thin it up in certain areas if we want. Again, we do have this reference image in the back, which is handy, so we can always reference that guy. So if I know I needed to bump these areas up, I could always push them up that way and thin this out however I want. So it's really like you're working with clay, and once you have a grasp on how the edit form tool works, that's really all there is to it as far as creating these more complex shapes. If I want to, I can create, this is sort of just a rectangular section, but if we look at the picture, it has sort of a more, I don't know, tapered shape to it. So I could grab this entire edge, and I can pull this edge up, which should give it more of like an aerodynamic look to it if we want. So the last step here, and obviously we're not done, but the last step that I would want to make sure we do is I have everything looking right-ish on one side, but down here I don't have this little addition. So what I can do is I can select all of these faces, and if I drag right to left, it will select everything that this box touches. So I can see that this box touches all those faces. And I can, actually, let me first turn off symmetry. So I can go to symmetry and clear symmetry to turn that off. And I can drag a box over all of those and hit delete. And then under symmetry, I can say mirror duplicate, and we can make a duplicate of this body. One problem I do have is I didn't think about where I placed this relative to the origin. And now it wants to know which plane do I want to mirror this about. So if I click on this plane, it's going to do that, which isn't quite what we want. So before I can mirror it, let's make a plane that goes right on this sort of split. So to do that, under the construct menu, there's a plane through 3 points button. And we can just grab 3 of these points. So I can say that one, this one, and this one. Doesn't really matter which 3 we pick because they're all planar. So now I can, again, do mirror duplicate. And the mirror plane is going to be this one. And now we've got a shape that's completely symmetrical on both sides. And that's about it. I can hit finish form when I'm done, and I can hide the canvas over here. And if I wanted to, for example, change the material, I can go under modify and go to appearance. And now we could give this like a chromed look if we want. We could go to metal, chrome. I give this like a chromed appearance so I could see how it's looking. If I go to the visual style, I can make it shaded. That way we get a more realistic look. And I might use that to help figure out what it is I want to tweak. And if I do want to make a change, the important part to know is I don't click, if you click this create form button again, it's like telling the software you want a new piece of clay. So it's not going to let you make changes to this shape. It would just let you make a new one. So if we want to make changes to this existing one, all we have to do is right click here on this purple feature and say edit. And now we're back editing this feature just like we were before. One other thing that I'll point out that's really helpful is if you're doing something complicated like this, it can get a little bit tricky figuring out where the inconsistencies are. So if I hide the canvas, I know that the surface didn't look perfect when I hit finish form, but it's hard to tell where this might be getting stretched or pulled a little bit too much. So one thing you can do is you can go under utilities and click display mode. And I can choose this body. And I can click this first one to turn it into box mode. And this really just simplifies the model and it sharpens every single edge. And when the model's in this mode, you can see how much easier it is for me to see where inconsistencies and weird things might be happening in my model. So this is, again, it in as it was. It was like this. So for example, the tail, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on here.
See that?
But if I click on the model and then go to display mode and I do box, it really just exaggerates everything and makes it simpler. So I can see that somehow the tail got pushed in. So I can grab my edit form tool and I can pull it out and try to fix it that way. Or I can grab this and start bumping it out. And the general rule of thumb is if the model looks good in this box mode view, it will look amazing when it's completely smoothed out. Because this will highlight every little imperfection. So for example, this edge, I can see it's sort of zigzagging around.
Mm-hmm.
So I could use this box mode to help me sort of clean all this up. I can see that. Because you can really get a feel for the flow of all of these edges. And it's really, really helpful. So when I was making my first go at modeling this, I was using box mode for everything. Because you can't really have any imperfections hide when your view is like this. They stand out really, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can see here it's looking a little bit funky, so I might move those back. And then the tools that I'm using a lot are these arrows for one direction, and then these squares here will move them in two directions. So I know that this square will just move it around this plane, but I'm not going to move it up and down in that direction. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and go back to smooth mode. And I'll hit finish form. So,
all right, guys. So I got my first prototypes from Shapeways. It's hit or miss. The size is off a little bit. These were coming out about 20 millimeters long and about 16 wide. And there was a lot of printability issues at that size. The little arms and the tail were so thin, it just wasn't working. I rolled the dice. These were only $1 or something a piece, so I figured I would do the print it anyway option. When you're prototyping stuff, they give you that option to see what you get, so you can see the effects of the design on the print, and you know if it's not printable. I believe this was just the standard white flexible nylon, and it didn't work at all. We've lost the tail pieces. Now, I probably still could use this. I'll cut the ends off and reshape it, and we'll just have a different shape hood ornament. This one, I think, was a different version of nylon. I can't remember. It's been a little while since I ordered them. That one held together better, but we still have some distortion on the tail piece. And this is the Frosted Ultra Detail. And it came out good. It's all held together nice, and the shape is there. But I still think the size is a little small. So here it is on the hood of the farm truck. And yeah, I think that'll work. But I'm going to go ahead and we'll go back in through Shapeways. And I'll show you how to do that and resize it. I'm going to go up a little bit because I think it is a little small in proportion to the body. Because those were not a small hood ornament in real life. They looked pretty good size, pretty big on the hood of a pretty big car. So this tractor grill, it may be a little on the small side. But that's still usable, and I think that the Frosted Ultra Detail, I think that was still like $3 or $4 for the print. And but yeah, so my ultimate goal with this is to print in some metal. I want to try brass or bronze or something we can get this to print in, because I think that the added color and texture of a metal is going to look cool on here. So let's go back on the computer and we'll do the resizing. All right, guys. So the first prototypes came out a little bit small, and it's the printability issues. As tiny as the arms are on this thing, it just wasn't working very well. So I'm going to upsize it a little bit. I did some measuring on my rat rod truck, and we're going to resize through Shapeways. It's easier than going back into Fusion and changing the dimensions of it there. So I think we're going to do, it's in centimeters. I'm going to do that in millimeters. And we're going to do 29. We'll try that percentage out. It's a little bit bigger. It still fits with the truck based off my measurements. So we'll save that. and then we'll come down here at the bottom, and it'll take a little while to process, but it will show you on the auto checks here what is available at that size and dimension and what isn't, and if there's any issues we can go in and edit it. I really want to try to print in some of the metals, so we're going to give that a shot. We'll let this thing load. And alright guys, so here's the latest prototypes. I got some metal prints. See, in the middle is the original size, and now I've upsized it a little bit so it A, will be easier to mount, and B, it looks a little more scale with the truck. And the metal prints wasn't able to print metal at the original size, so yeah, pretty happy with how they come out. The metal prints look awesome. I have this is a raw bronze and a raw brass, and then I've got 2 frosted ultra detail in plastic as well. Let me put one on the truck here and get a look at the bronze on the truck. I like the look of that a lot. It's a good finish. It's not too shiny, and I think the size is right. I'm not sure how I'm going to attach it. I may do another batch of prototypes. I need to make some type of mounting tab on the bottom, so that way I can just drill a hole in the grill and slide it down in there and glue it from the inside. I attempted to drill a hole in this one, but I don't have any bits really the right size for that because it's so tiny. And then trying to thread a 1.5 millimeter bolt into a tiny brass printed thing is kind of problematic. So I think it's going to be back to Fusion360 and make a little slot or something off the bottom to ease mounting. Be specific for this grill because it does have kind of a curved angle on the front. But yeah, we'll wrap this one up. I hope you found the tutorial helpful. And a big thanks out to Shapeways for setting all this up, and a big thanks to Taylor at Fusion360 for sharing some knowledge with us. And maybe we'll have some more videos like this to come. So I'll see y'all in the next one. Thanks for watching.